Okay, giving me a moment or two to get settled, and we're going to talk boundaries. So, I wanted to get on this live today to talk about boundaries and kind of what it looks like. And boundaries can be physical, energetic, personal. And when I started talking about boundaries on a post that I did, it made it really clear to me that a lot of folks wanted to talk about boundaries. And so I'm going to actually bring up some of the questions that people had about boundaries from IG as well. And so getting people on that was really important. And then just kind of talk a little bit about the difference between physical, personal, and energetic boundaries. So I had a couple other folks that we're going to head on here, but I think we'll just start. So first and foremost, just finding a comfortable seat, being comfortable with where you're at, taking a few breaths, kind of noticing how the body feels right now. And just taking those time. And as you take a few grounding breaths, kind of breathing in and out, kind of exploring how the body feels. And taking those breaths, settling in. And just exploring that physical realm, that sense of physical space around you, kind of your personal space boundary or bubble. And breathing into that sensation. And then as you breathe, kind of begin to notice if you can explore what your energetic boundary feels like. It could be a texture, it could be a color, it could be an image. To kind of know where energetic boundaries show up. And continue to breathe and flow through that. And then finally looking through into psychic boundaries. So the boundaries of kind of the psychic mind, the intuition, and not needing to like make sense of or have anything else but just your breath to explore kind of what comes up with you with mentioning these types of boundaries. And as you breathe, continuing to breathe in through the nose, maybe taking some breaths out the mouth, kind of grounding exhales, releasing or allowing things to just come to a sense of grounded reverence and space. And then slowly opening the eyes up. So Aurora, Creative Healing, and Earthy Bruja, thanks so much for joining. Kind of taking this moment and this time to just talk about boundaries. And have started having this conversation with myself about boundaries and what they look like from a physical sensation, from an energetic sensation, and then also bringing in the psychic sensation. I'm going to offer just my thoughts on this, as well as some reflections that I just came to just the other day, or just even yesterday. Actually, this amazing person who I highly recommend following, Sonia Renee Taylor, who is just so into dismantling body dysmorphia, fat phobia, all these just kind of isms, and does such an amazing job, and has this awesome IGTV called What's Up, Y'all, and really was talking about colonization and the reality that boundaries happen really in products of colonization. And by establishing clearer energetic boundaries, we're actually looking at ways to decolonize some of those ways of thinking. And I thought to myself, and how they just had such reverence, a specific situation that I want to talk about to reference with energetic and physical boundaries. And I'll use an example that Sonia experienced in herself. She is a queer, fat, Black femme and is an amazing, awesome person to listen and witness too. They had this thing where they were at a restaurant, and they were at a restaurant, her and her friend, also another Black woman, African-American Black woman, and they were eating. And they were eating, having a great time, you know, as you do when you eat with friends. It's like always great. And all of a sudden, a group of folks, some white folks came in, and without asking, requesting any permission, I think even making eye contact, which was something that was, really mentioned, they took a chair. They didn't know if they were expecting other people. They didn't even ask, which is just kind of, I think how many people were raised. You just ask. And they went about their business. And I want to bring this up because I think when we talk about things around colonization, really we're talking a lot about power. There's a lot of power structures in that. This idea of taking in ownership and entitlement. It's like we don't own the earth. We don't own other people's spirits. And yet we have, as a culture and a society, done so much around taking and ownership and entitlement, i.e. slavery, i.e., in indigenous, basically massacres across the United States. Like there's so much of this taking action. And again, that to me really defines these super intensive and really intentional on the part of colonization, disruption of physical boundaries. And so I want to bring in and just really just honor Sonia for just navigating that, because they really showed a clear example of physical boundaries being violated. And in a way that was so, it kind of blew my mind that there's no asking. And I want to really get into a lot of what I'm talking about today on this live is the importance of asking. Like we talk a lot about consent, and I think it's becoming more and more this thing within our culture, but requesting, asking permission when dealing with psychic energy, when dealing with energetic boundaries, like just energetic boundaries, psychic boundaries, and physical boundaries. This idea around the request, this idea around asking permission. It's the same thing if you're in connection with the land and you're wanting to work with a plant. Like it's not this idea of just this assumption of taking. It's this asking permission, creating some type of dialogue between the plant and yourself, some type of reciprocity between yourself. If you're a healer and you work with energy, a lot of the times it's about asking the field, energetic field, if it's open to working with you, it's open to being received, it's open to being seen. So I really just want to talk about how important that type of commitment is, and how when doing boundary work, when talking about boundaries, how important it is in this idea of shared experience and asking permission. Yes, Earthy Bruja. Yeah, so it's like I've been talking a lot about this. And then again, Sonia, the reason it's so fresh for me is because it happened. They have it on their IGTV right now. They kind of make these little videos. Hi. If you're just joining us, we're talking a lot about boundaries. And if there's anything you want to know about boundaries, energetic, physical, and psychic, feel free to put it in the comments. And I love comments because it means that I'm not just like talking to myself on the screen. So thanks for that. So when you take a moment to just kind of be in that space, Sonia just brought up, again, these conversations around permission and these conversations around the clear lack of boundaries that is perpetuated through colonization. And so that's really just the point I want to make. Check them out. They're amazing. So some of the questions I had on IG that I'm going to answer to is a lot about personal space holding. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So when we go into a room, there is usually for some, and again, this might not be true for all, some of my like Aries, Leo, Sag babies may feel differently that come in and represent that way. When we take up space, we usually like a little bit of like a bubble, something it doesn't have to be wide. And maybe for some it is based on safety and, what feels best in the body. But we want to explore a little bit of this kind of bubble of physicality. And we explore physical boundaries by really in how we show up in a space. And I think for me, that's body language. And again, this is all something that I attuned to prior to coming into a space. Cap space all the way. Capricorn space. I love that. When you take a moment to notice, even just where you are right now. So if you can take a moment and pause while you're wherever you are in this world of Instagram, and kind of notice where you are in this physical space realm, and check in with how you feel, like what the physical sensation of the body is. That opportunity to just simply check in before entering a new space or a physical space, a Virgo. I'm loving it. All of these, like, so the earth signs demanding space. I love that. Noticing that when space is given or presented is different than like when people just aren't given any space to take up. Like you can come into a really tight quarter or a really uncomfortable space. All of a sudden you feel like it's not the space to be, or you walk into a space and nobody looks like you and it's not a space to be. So there's, again, the complexities around how people occupy physical space and the ways that they show up and the way that physical space is presented. I just really want to make that clear. So when you're creating a space, and this is again from the frame and the lens that I have as a guide or someone who works with tarot or someone who focuses on tending dreams and who also loves producing events, like as an event producer, so much of how you create a space, how you welcome in a space is going to really help or hinder the folks that are coming in to check in with you, that are coming into your field, that are experiencing that. And so one of the biggest questions was how to maintain that personal space. And I felt really deeply connected to that. Oh, Aurora says, I have a habit of withdrawing within myself when in a larger group of people, but I don't know why, but I've recently become aware of it. I want to speak to that when we're talking about energetic space. I really think, and we can kind of go after this body language piece, but I really think when talking about energetic space, when talking about supporting your energetic field, a small amount of contraction, I think, is necessary to orient what is my stuff or what is my energy or what's my field and what's someone else's, which gets into those energetic boundaries and kind of those psychic boundaries. And that's where I feel like having tools and talismans and supportive work. Earthy Bruja has a lot of that supportive work that I've seen, and I'm excited to get a candle. It's a very big side note, but I'm really excited to get a candle at some point. Again, there's this work of being supported in holding that kind of physical, energetic container. And so, Aurora, I really want to just like honor you for that, because I think it's important. It's important to notice. I think the biggest thing is habits are created by observations. Observations are created by patterns. These patterns are really just like energetic codes that are infused in our body, some which are highly beneficial and some which unfortunately aren't and need to kind of be looked at or reassessed. But I think the body knows, our genetic code knows, like our spirit knows of what it is, if what it does and doesn't want, and it's our ability to listen and to witness and like to become aware, which, like you just mentioned, becoming aware of that, I think, is like such an amazing opportunity to check in with our boundaries. So the last thing around, hi Una, the last thing around physical boundaries is body language. So I want to implore and just offer that in my experience with body language, so much of how we move our bodies sometimes is the way that we're able to read our energy, and how other people's bodies might be the way that you're able to read and understand someone else's, and then be able to communicate in a really consensual and also non-harmful manner. I've worked a lot with some unhoused folks or folks that have experienced homeless in my community and where I live. A big thing within working with certain folks is just sometimes like hands, like where are your hands? How are your hands placed? Are they placed on your hips? Like, so like even like me doing this is like becomes this power stance and this power move. If you want to feel that way, that's a great place to start. That like power hip just feels really powerful. This feels closed. Like I just want to explore how our ability to communicate body language to others and our ability to read body language so that we can respect, understand, and not cause harm is huge in understanding physical boundaries. So going back to like working with unhoused, it's really important to always make sure that your hands are somewhere visible, because often they're used to, or unfortunately, it's more common for them to have had experiences on the streets where they're just having kind of unnecessarily violence happen, and they just kind of get snuck up on, or things become really quick and happen really quick. And so having your ability to talk and move freely and having your space open. So physical space, physical boundaries, it just is so important to understand that. The last thing I want to talk about with physical boundaries is the importance of ley lines. Ley lines, oh, I paused for a little bit. Ley lines are a really amazing kind of power center or power grid. My video keeps pausing. And I just really want to tell you that there's a depth about ley lines, about how they energetically source power and how important they are in infusing power into a space. I also want to talk about ceremonially, when we talk about boundary work, is often we can be creating supportive boundaries and ways and areas of protection. One of my favorites, like lots of witches, is like salt is one of my favorite boundary protectors. It is by far one of the like most accessible for me tools that I can put within my tool, kind of my cauldron, my kit, my ability to like work with kind of sending off negative points, is really focusing on where I place salt and how I kind of infuse salt into my daily ritual practice. Something else that I want to mention is gridding. And I think gridding is a really important thing when trying to create physical boundaries. And it can be done with any rock or stone. You know, I love stonework, and I'll speak to a little bit of stonework. I also want to emphasize that where you source your stones, how you source your stones, not really needing to take from new mines. I mean, we have done enough of that with the earth already. There's so much like secondhand stones out there just waiting to connect with you. So just kind of knowing your sources, as always, as we kind of continue to have conversations around sourcing things. Yes, baby, everyone to own your space, and using body language as your first line of communication. I've had to ask folks when in line to please back up. That is awesome. I want to just read this out for folks. Earthy Bruja mentions inviting everyone to own their space. Using body language as your first line of communication. However, use your words. I've had to ask folks when in line to please back up. Yeah, we'll get into the kind of idea around consent and permission when I talk about energetic and like sharing. But I really appreciate you bringing the line in of like being really close and people not understanding that. And all of a sudden, unfortunately, I'm brought to like the holidays, and which is so interesting because Holy Day doesn't really feel like holiday when people are not understanding or respectful of boundaries and space. And all of a sudden, the like ability to understand care and consideration for others is like neglected and it's supposed to be like a cheerful time. So thanks for bringing that up. And understanding words are just as important, which I want to get into with energetic boundaries. So grid work, after doing grid work, like I said, it's like, for me, grid work is really easy and accessible. It feels really good to do by just placing those stones around. I personally, if I'm going to do a lot of protection grid work and really honing in on a space, I use a lot of onyx, obsidian, and petrified wood. I use things that are really, really earth-based, that are darker in color, that provide strength, resilience, and deep senses of protection. And I feel that with onyx. I love black onyx. It's one of my favorites for that type of work. So energetic boundaries, and Earthy Bruja did like a really good segue to that. So I want to talk about that. Of course, an energy cast, an energy boundary. Yes, that's so true. Did a really good job about the idea of words. And so like when we're talking about energy, it can be a shared connection. It could be something that you have internal. Like energy is such a big word in itself that I'm not going to try and pretend to define it, because I'm not doing that. Hmm. But I want to talk about energy, and I want to talk about how energetic boundaries come up. And I wanted to actually talk to somebody about this. They were saying this. Talking about how do you talk to someone around boundaries without hurting their feelings, which I thought was a really interesting question. That's like came up on the IG, is how do you talk to people's boundaries without hurting their feelings? So when we're talking about energy, we're talking about something within the body, some vibration, some frequency in which you're kind of cultivating it, and you can be operating from so many different energies and frequencies at so many different times of the day. So when looking at energetic boundaries, when entering in, and I'll use this kind of, now I'm going to kind of use more of like a one-on-one when talking with someone else, whether working with a client or working with a friend, or actually moving through something that feels challenging. I'm going to kind of refer to that type of situation. When you're dealing with energy, you can begin to notice the push and pull, or the relationship of how you relate to one another pretty quickly. You can kind of notice based on language, what people are saying. Earthy Bruja does a really good job of mentioning that, what people are actually saying and how they're communicating. How they're saying something, right? The way they're saying it, what's coming up, and then a little bit of tonality, and then also the resonance. And that comes all into like personal space and physical boundary, like their body language, the way they're showing up, right? The way that someone's trying to approach and talk to you. Biggest thing around energetic boundaries that I want to continue to talk about, which again reflects back into overculture and reflects back into understanding like things like colonization, is permission. Everything needs to have permission granted. Don't go out there making the assumption that someone is just like ready to hear your entire thing, whatever is going on, whether it's like can be really intense, really tough. There's a few folks who you've passed that threshold of boundary with. There's a few folks where you've already made this agreement. Maybe it's a beloved, maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a family member. Maybe that threshold or that boundary of physicality has already been crossed. Most of the time though, just like everybody else, we are operating on so many different levels. We are going through so many different things. And without asking, without noticing, are you ready and willing to receive this right now? Are you able to understand and hear me? Do you have space to hold this? A lot of the times that's the way that I offer is like, do you have space to hold this right now? Is it okay even asking that type of permission? Does it feel okay to share? That in itself is like leaps and bounds, because you're actually asking, like literally think of it as a portal. You're asking to step into somebody else's space, to actually have them be seen. The minute we get in about 4 feet of each other, this is just kind of something that I've heard. I've heard it, I think, first from Stephen Buhner. The moment we get into like closer personal space, we no longer have a mind connection. I mean, there is that, but we have this like heart connection. Something happens where our hearts connect. So the closer we are in physical space, going back to physical boundaries, closer we become in physical space, the closer our energetic space begins to kind of coalesce and connect. So I want to talk just how important it is with like, so how do you talk to someone around boundaries without hurting their feelings? This gets into, and we could have a whole IG live about this, and I'm like, it's just so funny to talk about. This comes into projections and reflections. And I say it in this kind of like smirky tone because projections are like the kryptonite. I'm like trying to think of it like the kryptonite, the poison, like they're what is like, is so hindering to folks' energetic spaces. Because when someone projects onto you, they're literally, it's almost like this like cloak of energy. usually not the most, doesn't feel good. This cloak of like kind of yucky, it doesn't feel good. Heavy is the best way that comes to. And by heavy, I just mean like you're feeling a little bit of gravity, like the literal physical sensation of gravity happens. Instead of like you're rising, you're feeling a little bit of a falling sensation. When that shows up, you're realizing that all of a sudden this projection, how this person is describing something and how this person is trying to say something, often that happens with, when you feel that, when you're feeling really, uncomfortable, and it always starts with you a lot of the times. If you're just joining, we're talking a lot about boundaries and energetic boundaries. So hi, Threads of Fate. I love your deck. It's amazing. Thanks so much for joining. When we talk about that idea around projections and the conversation around projections, it's like, whose stuff is it anyway? It's like that idea, whose line is it anyway? It becomes, whose stuff is it anyway? When people are projecting, really noticing their language, how they're describing things. Are they constantly using you? Because the minute you use you over I statements, for example, I feel pretty deeply ingrained about showing up in certain ways. I feel uncomfortable sometimes talking in front of big groups. Those are I statements that I would use, as opposed to, when you feel uncomfortable talking in front of big groups, how it's like sometimes taking up that space can feel like a lot, I understand it's just one word, but the ramifications, the complexity, the energetic boundary about that has been crossed, because you're now using a statement and trying to like relate that to be what that other person is feeling or sensing. My examples might not be the best, and I apologize for that, but understanding a little bit of that language around boundaries, that kind of connection of whose stuff is it anyway? You pretty quickly just begin to see when someone's kind of just ready to unload on you. And that's, again, where that permission and that consent becomes important. When we become in healthy, reciprocal, and generative relationships, it's because reciprocity has happened. There's an exchange, there's an energy conversation happening. You're giving, I'm receiving. I'm giving, you're receiving. There's that kind of connection and that energy that feels really just stable. I kind of think of it because it does feel like a weaving, like the threads feel very woven together. And again, in terms about feelings, I want to talk a little bit about feelings. Feelings and emotions are big things. And to feel something is unique to you and something to be honored and cherished. Also, sometimes when we feel, at least, and this I'm speaking for myself, sometimes when I feel that I'm experiencing a sensation, I have to really understand, is this my feeling? Am I feeling upset because of something that someone else did? Or am I feeling upset because, I'm not happy with the result, which is okay. So this idea of like hurting feelings, like when you're being nasty and malicious, and I'm being nasty, malicious, manipulative, painful, it's because in a way I feel like that was my intent. My intent was to hurt. My intent was to be manipulative, and I'm not saying this as like, this is how I am, but I can feel that intention behind it. Sometimes I don't mean to do that at all. Sometimes it's just what happens. Sometimes it's intergenerational programming. Sometimes it's conditioning. There's ways that has happened to me. So when someone is, again, this idea of how do you talk to someone around boundaries without hurting their feelings? You have to go in owning your feelings as important, owning your feelings as enough, and then be able to hear that they might not be happy with that. They may not be happy with your feelings. You might not be happy with their feelings. It doesn't mean that you have to change. And it doesn't mean that the way you're feeling is unacceptable or not okay. There's such deep depth in understanding that it's okay, like, to have that separation, right? Like, what makes us separate is like those unique entities of how we show up in the world. Like, I'll admit it, I'm not a big like we're all one person. Like, if that's something you're down with on this page, I don't know what to say. That's not really been my thing. I think we all have entities that are unique to us. We all, of course, get to coalesce together in spirit when we're riding those epic waves in the cosmos. Like, I feel so deeply connected that those lines become blurred. But this, like, again, I think there's a lot of harm saying like, well, it's okay, or I'm sorry you feel that way. I totally want to say that is something I used to say all the time, and it was so harmful, I didn't even know it. I thought I was using like nonviolent or more understanding ways of communication, but me saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, it's almost like being like, you feel shitty and too bad. Like, there's ways to have a conversation around emotions and around boundaries and around what they look like. And the biggest thing that I've experienced in this is name it. Name the emotion, whatever it may. Maybe it's a texture, a color, but naming it and witnessing it is so important. And I want to say that even up here, we talk a little bit about it. Aurora Creative said it so well, of like just building that awareness is so important. Oh, Earthy Brew, hi, I love that you're talking. Feel free to talk in the comments, y'all, so I'm not talking just to myself. Yes, you just look at it as saying no and not attaching to the results of that no. That was so gracefully said. Amazing. Yeah, the attachment of what no looks like and hearing no. Again, also something that I think is rooted in colonization and supremacy is people aren't here to hear, certain folks aren't used to hearing no all the time. The reality is I've heard no a lot, which is interesting why boundary work seems really important to me, because I've I've had no a lot. And understanding the attachment to that no, right? One no could be the realm of possibility to a new yes, right? Like, we're holding those dimensions. That's why I love being like the witch who holds both and, right? It can be one, it can also be the other. We constantly live in this amazing paradox of both and. Yes, and it's this. Yes, and it's that. So understanding the importance of that. Again, energetic boundaries, something that I've noticed, and we're going to kind of travel into psychic layers too, especially if you're somebody who reads energy in auric fields, i.e. does Reiki or some type of distance healing, and that's something that is a medium of yours. I consider myself an intuitive healer and pretty claircognizant. I haven't received any Reiki training, though I used to see colors a lot as a kid, and my little witchling is like, I didn't do anything for it. So working on setting boundaries and not being afraid to say no. Yes. Moving addition to not making others uncomfortable and not being offensive. Yes. Aurora Creative Healing, working on setting boundaries and not being afraid to say no. I'm here for that. I'm so here for you saying the sacred no. Let's make it no. Let's make no sacred. Like, again, something that's happened in New Age culture, and I guess today's the day for me to own, where I stand with some of that, is that this idea around yes, 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 all you hear is yes. Yes, and I'm going to use that and there. Having a sacred no, understanding that in your no, there's so much beauty. There's so much opportunity in that no, and in your no is actually saying yes to a bigger part of yourself, to the soul's work, is so important. For me, like, saying no is my opportunity to say yes in such a bigger way, in a way that's beyond space and time, in a way that's like, it's intrinsic, it feels deep, it feels like there's something in my bones by saying no, that all of a sudden this comes up, saying yes to me. That's right, let's say it, yes to me. And so I just feel so connected to that, and I feel so important in learning how to say that no. And also it's practice, right? I think it's like the commitment to it. It's the commitment to saying, now that that's something that I stand for, I'm going to commit to it. And the noticing and the awareness and the observation. I think so much around boundary work is our ability to stop, pause, reflect, and then respond. I will admit it, I am a pretty fiery being on my chart mostly. I have like, thank goodness for my moon in Libra. But I very much shoot like pretty intensively, and I've learned a lot. Thank goodness for a North Node in Pisces. I've learned a lot about slowing it down and responding over reacting. By the way, no is a complete sentence. Yes, no explanation needed. Yes. I love all of this. So I'm like, I like to say by the way is like by the witch. By the witch. And I love that. So well said. Yeah, energetic boundaries. I love all the conversations that are coming up. Again, if you feel like you want to say something around energetic boundaries and what's worked for you, I'm already feeling like there's a really awesome, enriching discussion here. So, and I just love that folks are commenting and talking. So, because that to me is huge. Sometimes on lives, I'm like, we're talking in a community, in a container. And, you know, I want to be able to see you, because I do. And I see you, and I appreciate your time for just witnessing and showing up and being here. So we're beginning to be into the realms of psychic energy and what psychic energy looks like and how it feels. Again, I'm gonna move through this in a way that makes sense to me. As a healer, my biggest realms of healing, again, are intuitive. I am not clairvoyant, and I don't consider myself a psychic medium or prophetic. So I definitely just want to witness that folks that are wanting to talk about boundary energy in that way, I would love any comments, especially if you do have some psychic medium kind of gifts or offerings. I'd love to hear your perspectives on this. So maintaining psychic energy, i.e., I'd like to say the witnessing of an energy vampire. That's a really good way for me when I think about psychic energy. Hi, blessed be your line. Hello. Thank you, sweetheart, the wonderful share. Yes, no problem. Hi. Well, thank you for spending some time and sleep with us. Blessed be to you as well. Thanks for the comments. When we talk about psychic energy, and we talk about that, I think the field is pervasive in culture. I think it's over culture, mainstream culture, capitalism, isms, like that to me is actually the psychic field. And I'm going to go like big, and then I'll kind of like bring it down to something that feels personalized to me. Psychic energy is like a pervasive thought pattern, is a mindset, is a narrative. Like the stories we tell ourselves are kind of these like psychic energies at play. These stories that we tell ourselves sometimes are not rooted from ourselves and our essence. They're rooted from society. They're rooted from systemic racism. They're rooted from capitalism, right? They're rooted from colonization. All of those things, all of those isms, right, are these psychic fields that have amplified, that are very real, right? So just because I'm saying psychic doesn't mean they're tangible. Like this is real shit happening to real people, has been happening to real fucking people for a long time. I want to explore psychic fields and shifting that and helping to clear psychic boundaries. And the best way that I have noticed in doing that is visualization and dream work. Those are the two things that I have noticed. Two things that I've noticed that help support that. I'll talk first about visualization. We can't visualize a world in which we want to change if we can't imagine ourselves in what that world would look like. The imagination, as we know it, is constantly in jeopardy. We are given images of what we need to look like. We are given images in how we need to act. We're giving images after images after images. I like to call those counterfeit images. I call them that because they're not coming from your sense of who you are. They're just like kind of put in, you know? Hey, Pharaoh, how's it going? We're talking about psychic energy. So we're constantly told, you know, how to be, how to act. And I'm offering this visualization work, the idea of seeing what you want, the idea of dreaming in, right? I want to really call out all of the daydreamers. Please keep dreaming. Anybody who's had big visions, who like when they were a kid, I'm actually curious about this with with Pharaoh. I'm curious, like as a kid, was there this witness of becoming something bigger? Was there this witness of becoming, and this could be like, as a kid, I remember writing a story about magic. You know, when I was a kid, I remember mixing these bowls in my we always had a lot of rhubarb sticks. I remember like using that as like a spoon to mix, you know, in the playground. These ideas of imaginal realms and how important it is to continue to cultivate that is cultivating our psychic field. Even reading, like this is the interesting part. It's like reading, I don't consider a counterfeit image because they're from the imaginal realm and the essence of people. Great writers of fiction or science fiction. I mean, Octavia Butler, hands down for me, is like, and Jewel Gomez are probably some of my favorites in sci-fi fiction. Ursula Le Guin, right? Like, so understanding the imaginal capacity, the realms that these amazing writers were able to cultivate, you know? And so when we're also working with psychic energy, we're looking also within the realm of the dream time. And as a tender, someone who loves working and guiding and exploring dreams, which means working with another person one-on-one to explore the deeper realms of their imagination. When you realize you're not pretending, you're not making it up, it's not fake, it's real, just like your skin, it's a real thing. The more you can illuminate into the fact that you're dreaming within a dream, that what you're dreaming is real, the more that psychic energy, or the more your psychic boundaries, I think, increase. Because all of a sudden you realize that there's more than meets the eye to your body. There's more than meets your eye to your dream time. It's your expansive quality and your ability to see outside of the world in which you're living. Now, I think that's hard in a lot of ways. Systems of oppression have made that extremely difficult. And I want to continue to emphasize the care and consideration for creating or blooming or cultivating or germinating or growing something in the shell of the old being like a paradigm in which we're currently in, and how the continued importance of dreamers, the continuous importance of the imaginal realm, you know, of pleasure, of joy, of understanding why that's so important to cultivate, I think is what's helping to clear our psychic field. One is like, you know, globally, or at least like within the realms of which we know it, and also within individuals. So I want to just honor deeply just how important it is to cultivate that practice. When clearing a psychic field, for me, when I clear psychic energy, i.e. when I go into a space and all of a sudden, I'll use a different example. The biggest way I think for myself that psychic energy can become a lot is the news. And I'll specifically talk about the news of what I see, violence and harm to specifically African-American communities and police brutality. And that's I'm just going to opt and just stop there because a trigger warning, and I don't want to cause any harm in that way. But for me, there's this deep-seated psychic boundary because it's pervasive and it's felt. And if you don't feel it, I implore you to understand why you're not feeling that. Yes. Not placing new wine in old wineskins just came up. Yeah. I would love for you to like explore more on that, the new wine and old wine earthy bruja, because it sounds like a really interesting conversation. The other example I'm going to use with the news is like natural disasters. Australia, the Amazon, Puerto Rico. I could go on, literally. I could go on and on about these natural disasters of what's happening to the earth. And though that psychic energy, that psychic field is felt, that conversational like whirlwind is felt. And so I'm imploring you to notice how your field changes when you experience those things. I don't want to say it's okay, but I understand if there's moments where you numb out. Sometimes we've been inundated with so much suffering and pain that we think that that's just the normal. And I want to implore you and offer space to know that that's hard. And also to know that feeling that is feeling something and is feeling something big, and noticing when you choose to numb out, or you choose to just not notice, or you choose not to just pay attention, how that affects the psychic field. The way you set our imagination maintained by old systems causing a blockage. Yes, totally. Yes. So again, I want to be really like understanding and open to talking about this conversation around psychic energies, but I also want to really implore you that it is on you to do that work, to like look at where you numb out, to see some of those patterns of habits, and to understand that that's okay, it's okay to kind of to be in that space and to numb out. But it's also like, we need you, especially as a healer and a worker. Like, we need you so badly. I'm gonna plug my phone in here real quickly. Boop. So I want to offer just some tools around psychic fields, and I really want to explore actual like tools, talismans, things like that, that I like using. So I mentioned salt. I mentioned salt and suffer protection of physical boundaries. I mentioned onyx. I mentioned obsidian. I mentioned petrified wood. Also, know your source. Know your source. Know your source. I'm going to call in Earthy Bruja and their candle magic, because I've just been seeing some of your candle magic, and I'm excited to support that soon. But candles to me are some of the best ways to facilitate moving energy, kind of igniting energy, as well as kind of solidifying energy in. So there's so much around that. So I want to just offer that in, that candle magic can be so profound. And some of my favorite candles to work with, there's so many different kinds, especially if you get one from a witch or someone who is really into focusing spells within the magic of the candle. It's a whole other just like experience. But just a tapered candle, so one that you get in a candelabra, the kind of skinny ones, writing some candle magic and some candle wisdom, writing on it, inscribing on it, using it with a pen or a knife or whatever you think you can write with, writing some words around boundaries that feel like you want to cast those into being. And the nice thing about the long candle is when it burns, it'll kind of burn, and it'll burn through the words. And then usually it's when that happens, it's kind of the magic has taken hold. Hi, Calico Alchemy Organics. So just kind of honoring that space around that. Another thing that I love, and like I've loved forever, and I have it somewhere, but I'm like, I should just show y'all what I have, is blue kyanite. It is like a tried and true psychic energy stone. It is a stone that is used to maintain psychic energy. It's like, I'm just reading about it here. It's like how you help to clear energy. There's so much around blue kyanite and its importance. It's one of the few stones that doesn't take on energy. So if you're working with this stone and the magic of the stone, it doesn't take on negative stuff. So if you're wanting to kind of like clear a room, it'll only kind of help receive and transmute that. It won't kind of, if this is something that might be new to you working with stonework, or you're curious, stones are like batteries. They'll take charges. And so if you just like have a stone and you've left it out for, I don't even know how long, a few months, and you haven't touched it, the reality is it's like a battery. It'll begin to kind of like rust, or it's like anything that sits out, or like a plant that hasn't been watered. It's like a living being, an entity. It has its own relationship. So taking time with your stones, whether it's like bathing them, which I love, giving stones bath, putting them out at the moonlight. We're about to have a full moon coming up, I believe, on Sunday. We're coming very close. We're close. I think it's on Sunday. So just kind of noticing the relationships that you have to stones and stonework, but blue kyanite is one of my favorites to use for psychic boundaries and psychic energy. The one other, was rosemary. Rosemary to me is like a tried and true. It is one of the most important herbs that I use because it brings the sense of clarity and focus while not being a jolt. Like sometimes we can take things that are energetic that can be a jolt, and there's like this jolt of energy that might feel like something we need. Sometimes caffeine can be that way. Like as I drink my coffee here, like it's real. Like those things are real. But rosemary, just the smell of rosemary, it has this nurturing northerly quality, right? This time that feels really grounded and important. Hi, Carlos. If you're just joining us, we're talking about boundaries and what they look like. So if you have anything to say about boundaries, feel free to put it in the comments. So the importance of that, knowing that, also with sourcing with plants and connecting with our plant friends, there's tons of plants out there that are localized to us, rosemary being one of them, which is why I mentioned rosemary as a plant to continually tend to and continually build a relationship to. That feels really promising and important to mention around psychic boundary work. There's a couple more things that I want to mention around boundaries, and then a couple more comments that I heard. So I'll first just mention my comments. So comments were, people don't have boundaries. Boundaryless. Whoa. I'm like, I don't even have words for it. If you are boundaryless, it's like, well, there's a lot of folks out there, like, and I'm not considering myself one of those, although I can help support like spell work for boundaries. But there's a lot of healers out there that help support creating clear boundaries and what clear boundaries look like. And so I want to offer and implore you, when working in boundary work and exploring that, kind of deciding what part of boundary work you want to explore. So physical boundaries is your ability to either hold space or take up space, right? Hold space, being able to be in a container and allow space to be facilitated around you without needing to act or react. You're just kind of responding and reading the field that way. Or taking up space, like your willingness to be seen, your willingness to show up, your willingness to know you matter, because you fucking do. And like, you matter so much, and your work matters, and how you move through this world matters. And so just kind of sending that out. So that's kind of physical. Energetic boundaries. If you're working in the land of understanding projections, if you're working in the land of being able to receive a projection and not take it as your own, right? Like, we talk about not taking things personally. That's a really beautiful statement. Like, don't take things personally. And a little bit harder to navigate. One, if somebody's coming in it very directively. Two, if their energy and kind of their ability to like kind of go in with what I almost feel like is like an energy torpedo, or an energy kind of like is really direct and glaring, and it catches you off ground. And if you don't have boundaries, it's like being ricocheted off of your body, and all of a sudden, like, I'm literally moving in a way of like you feel something, and it just is like a vibration, just like something. Again, I'm going to bring Sonia Renee Taylor into the space, just like that, white man who's taking her chair without even asking, looking, noticing. It's just like this clear lack of boundaries by this individual to not even recognize and notice that one, she's there. Two, she exists. Three, that she would actually be considered of the chair. Again, if you weren't here, there was this amazing IGTV excerpt about Sonia Renee Taylor talking about decolonizing our mindsets, and ways that's shown up for her on how colonization still exists in everyday life. And they are dope and amazing, and you should follow them. But so if that's the type of boundary work you're working with, Or is it psychic? Is it this idea of like really a larger sense? Is like, has the imagination kind of become solely the imagination of others, solely the images of others, solely something outside of you? Where are you cultivating an imaginal practice, i.e. visualization, i.e. dream work? I really like sacred land walks. Trust walks are a really great way to move in the imaginal realm, because the earth, nature, you know, Gaia often wants to connect and relate to us in that way. Often wants to live through imaginal realms over rational realms, because being rational, it's supposed to be claimed as like being all safe and being all good, but being rational just means that we're trying to constantly narrow to the one right answer, whatever that means, and move forward. So again, if you're boundaryless, just try to figure out which area of boundaries you want to focus your energy on, because focusing them all at once can be overwhelming. So I just want to, you know, ask which part of your energy, which part of your boundaries do you really want to focus on? And then when you do that, either implore the use of amazing healers. I know 3 healers on here just now that are amazing and doing amazing work. Earthy Bruja, as well as, where did she go? Aurora Creative Healing are 2 folks that I just kind of know through friendships and community on Instagram. So all of those folks. Yes, Earthy Bruja has a really great comment. I'm going to read it out. May I suggest anyone who moves without boundaries and can't as yet see it for themselves, try focusing on the boundaries of others first. Oh, that's great. I really love that. Yeah, what I heard from that, and just to reflect off of that share, is trying to focus on other people's boundaries. So understanding other people's boundaries and noticing that. Observation is such a beautiful thing, and takes a lot of practice, because we're so used to inserting in many parts. Many people in the overculture are used to inserting themselves instead of practicing that witnessing and that observation and that awareness. So thanks for bringing that up. It's telling me I have 1 minute and 39 seconds, which is really interesting. I'm going to try to be doing this more on Fridays. That's kind of my goal, is to kind of do this. Hopefully this time works for people. Let me know in the comments if it feels good. It seems like we had a really awesome discussion. I just want to thank folks for showing up, for making themselves available, for being willing to have a discussion around this. If there's other things you want to explore and talk about, I'm probably going to start doing tarot readings and live tarot pulls, because that feels really alive for me to just pull tarot, as well as talking about some upcoming stuff. So if you live in Eugene, I am doing a major arcana and herbal tarot class, which is happening in March. And it's going to be 4 Saturdays in March, March 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th. We'll have some spring equinox celebration too. I'm doing it with a sweet friend of mine, Seed and Soul Farms, and we are so excited. So information for that, I think I just posted a link there. There's also a link on the Instagram. I just feel super grateful to have this discussion. Thank you, Earthy Bruja, for a lot of your comments. It's just really amazing to, again, be in community and have discussion. Like, it's not just me talking at you because, like, I can't, that's just not how it's not how I like to be in community. I like to see and hear everybody's understandings. Don't pause me. Darn it. Hey, if you just did a IG live with me, it ended so abruptly. I'm just getting used to doing this more. So check back. I think every Fridays at 11:30 is probably going to be my new time. And I just look forward to connecting with y'all. So thanks so much. And again, I'll see y'all soon. Okay, bye.